Welcome to Childcare Rockstar Radio. I am your host, Kris Murray. Childcare leaders around the globe are breaking through challenges, leading the way in innovation, testing new best practices, and impacting children and families in a much more powerful and positive way than ever before. Each week, join me for interviews with early childhood leaders and experts that will leave you inspired to become the next childcare rockstar. Now, let's go. This is episode 137 of Childcare Rockstar Radio featuring Ellen Reynolds. Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am so thrilled that you are here for this one. We are talking about making your voice heard in early learning in our industry and diving into advocacy. This is a journey I have resisted for a while. I told this story recently in Nashville on the stage of Childcare Success Summit. For years, I've been being asked to represent, to show up for the childcare industry and dive into lobbying, trying to affect and impact policy in a positive way for the early learning industry. And I kind of was thinking this whole time, like, that's not really my jam. That's not really what I'm here on the planet to do. And then something shifted in me. Something called me to this journey. I think it was understanding and realizing that we have a lot of power in our groups, in our community, in our tribes that we've developed over the last 13 years, and utilizing that power and that natural asset that we've built as a community, the largest community of early learning owners, for-profit, private preschools and childcare centers worldwide, but especially, of course, in the United States. And so utilizing and harnessing the power of the community is something that I am diving into with today's guest at the podcast right here, right now. You're going to meet Ellen Reynolds, and she is the CEO of the Georgia Childcare Association. And GCCA was one of the first state owners associations of owners, private preschool owners that I started working with. I showed up at their conferences, which they still do once or twice a year, the national, owners conferences at the state level in Georgia. And so making connections with all of these Georgia owners, and then also did the same thing in Florida, North Carolina, and Texas, as well as Ohio. Most notably, a little bit of time spent in Oklahoma as well. So getting to know all of these folks through state associations at their conferences was part of my early journey. And I'm so excited to bring it back full circle and bring Ellen Reynolds to the podcast today. She is a force. She knows a ton about lobbying, advocacy, and affecting change at the policy level. And you will hear her in this podcast talk about the complexity of it all. And unbeknownst to me, the policy nuances and the different components of how to improve the state and the quality of childcare across this country, it has actually the same level of complexity, says Ellen, as healthcare. And we all know what a crazy beast healthcare in this country is. And so with that complexity comes major challenges. Not to mention that we have part of the complexity is because we are set up as a republic, a country based at the state level, right? We're a republic of 50 states, and that was how we were designed to be when we were set up with our governments. And so because of that level of disparity across the states, or just differences across the states, and then diving into regions and communities, counties and towns, there's a lot to try to get your arms around in our industry. And so we're going to dive into the topic today here on the podcast. I also want to make sure that you know that we have a Facebook group, which has had several hundred people join it recently, the Childcare Champions Facebook group. So it's a private, open Facebook group for anybody that wants to come in and be part of our mission, which is to impact and affect positive change, helping develop high quality childcare centers across the United States in a way that is a positive and makes sense, a logical approach, a sensible approach for private for-profit preschools in particular, and nonprofits as well. So everybody who is interested in that mission is coming on in to our Facebook group, and I invite you to please join us if this is something that calls to you. And again, it's called Childcare Champions, and you can search that up on Facebook and join us. And so we're going to learn all about the different components of how to make your voice heard at the state and national level. And Ellen is going to walk us through and simplify this process and how to get started. 2 or 3 key actions we talk about in the podcast for what you should do to become more involved as an advocate in the world of ECE. And so we hope that you will do these things and you'll dive in and try to impact positive change with us. Myself, I am post Nashville. I've had a couple weeks of rest. It was an incredible childcare success summit, and a lot of people are hashtagging that it's the hashtag best summit ever. So many ahas, so much love. The vibe in the room was unparalleled, and perhaps the best speaker we've ever had, Miss Lisa Nichols, literally brought down the house. Just insane energy, insane just levels of inspiration and motivation going on in that room. I've never seen anything like it, pure and simple. So I was so blessed to be a conduit to all of the mind-blowing moments that people took home with them to re-energize them in their business, and to bring Lisa Nichols to you, to the audience, was incredible. What else do I need to tell you guys? That's it. Just what I'm doing now is I'm actually working on my 2023 plan. So we will talk more about how this podcast is actually going to evolve and improve in terms of listener engagement. And so I'm going to ask you as a listener or a viewer to engage with me at a higher level. And we're going to make some changes to our 2023 podcast format. And I'm very, very excited about that. And just so stay tuned. You'll be hearing more about that shortly. And just working on 2023, like what do I want to actually have experience? What experiences do I want to have in my life next year? And what are the vibes that I want to bring to my life? What are the energy components, dreams, experiences, relationships, and of course, goals and accomplishments. And so just working on all of that. And I would invite you to do the same. And this is a great time of year to cultivate and work on and ponder, preferably journal in hand, and write these things down, guys, because the more that you do this work, the more you will continue to craft the life that you've always dreamed of. And that's what I want for you so much. So that could be a homework item for you coming off of this podcast. Without any further ado, let me bring you an amazing lady, a force of nature, such an advocate, the strongest, most knowledgeable advocate of early learning. I've had the pleasure to meet Miss Ellen Reynolds. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am thrilled to bring you an amazing guest today. Ellen Reynolds is the CEO of the Georgia Childcare Association. Ellen, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today, Kris?
I'm doing fantastic. Where are you right now?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and the sun is shining, and it's a beautiful fall day.
Very, very good. Even though we potentially have some storm issues coming in the direction of Florida, Georgia, but we'll fingers crossed.
For our friends in Florida.
Yes, sending prayers to our friends and members in Florida and listeners. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I am the CEO of the Georgia Childcare Association. Like you said, the Georgia Childcare Association represents the 3,200 licensed childcare providers in Georgia. We have members all across the state. And I started with lobbying on behalf of the Georgia Childcare Association 20 years ago when it was me and just 5 people in a room. And over the years, we've grown the association. And in 2017, I took over as the CEO. I'm also a lawyer. And so, that background benefits me greatly in trying to advocate on behalf of our providers and the children they're serving.
Love it. And we'll dive in. I'd like to know a little bit more about Georgia Child Care Association. Cut.
I'm not the only one that gets tongue-tied.
Yeah. Tom is trying to get into the Zoom room. So will you just let him know that he's not allowed? So tell us a little bit about your home life. What are some interests? And tell us more about family life with what's going on with Ellen at home.
Well, I'm married to a lobbyist as well. We have a company together, True North Strategies. And so we have lobbied together for the 14 years of our marriage. And I have a precious stepson who is 20, who also lives with us while he's pursuing some social media platform dreams of his. And so we have 2 amazing little puppy dogs that light up our worlds. And we love football around here because we're from the South. So you gotta, that's got to be on the agenda. So our Saturdays are pretty busy right now watching football.
Yes. Love it. Love it. Now, how do you divide your time between, are you like pursuing individual attorney or things with your husband and your firm, as well as being the CEO of GCCA, or how is that?
Yes. Yeah, I don't practice law anymore.
Okay.
I did that for a couple of years and found out there's a better way to live life than billing your time in 6-minute increments. So I got into lobbying, which is much more fun. And instead of intervening with 2 people, you get to affect 10 million people's lives with the legislation you pass. Yeah. So yes, my husband and I have represented all kinds of companies from, Home Depot on taxation matters to a hospital and pharmacist and oncology groups on healthcare issues. So we have covered a breadth of issues and came out of that experience and just decided a few years ago when the CEO position came open that I was ready for a new challenge and sort of to dedicate a little bit more of my time to childcare. I'm very passionate about it. My mom was an educator and my dad was a small business owner. So it kind of marries those 2 things from my past that I'm very, very, very passionate about. In fact, the first dinner I ever had with the governor was as my mom's date in high school because she was teacher of the year for the state of Georgia. So that's how passionate we are about education in my family. And so I love that. The work I do on behalf of providers, helping them have the very best environment possible that we can create so that they can do what they do well and take care of babies.
Yes. And I have to say that the providers in Georgia are very, very fortunate to have such a strong state association. I believe that GCCA has been the strongest and most vibrant and engaged association I've worked with, and been able to be at your conferences, speak at your conferences, and make connections with all of the amazing childcare folks in Georgia. And I met Ellen through Sharon Foster, who has been in our academy and is doing amazing things at her schools.
She's our president right now.
And she's your president right now. So I was able to meet you, Ellen, we started an advocacy group that we'll talk a little bit more about coming up in the podcast. But I was very fortunate to have these amazing ladies from Georgia as part of our group because y'all are very active. You're one of the most active states in the union with regard to these issues. So
we are. And we hope at some point that we can help other states grow their associations because we know so much of what affects providers happens at the state licensing agency level, more so than the federal level, although that's changed a little bit these last few years. Our advocacy has definitely taken on more of a federal focus as the Biden administration proposed Build Back Better. And even prior to that with the pandemic, that really just kind of shifted things for everyone. So yeah, we're very proud of what we've built here and are continuing to build and hope to unveil some more exciting new things. But I love our providers. They're a big, huge reason. The ones on our board are a huge reason we are the success we are. I always say they've forgotten more than I'll ever know about childcare. They're the experts. It's my job to rely on them, take what they're telling me and go advocate, with our licensing agency. So, and our elected officials. So we're very blessed with really strong quality childcare providers here in Georgia.
Yeah. Well, I love that. So let's dive into advocacy. So, the listeners of this podcast are primarily owners and directors, primarily leaders of private, for-profit preschools. We certainly have also a good chunk of nonprofits. Let's talk about if someone's listening to this and they want to get more involved in impacting both state licensing regulations and policies that are happening at their state level, maybe even nationally at some point. What's kind of like maybe 1, 2, or 3 actions that someone can take to get started if they're not doing anything in this realm yet?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that question, because we're only as effective as our membership and our base of people that are willing to get active, both to inform me about the issues, because that's how I generally hear about them bubbling up through phone calls. One, maybe an isolated incident when I hear it from 3 or 4 providers, then I start to ask around, or others seeing this experience. But so we need members to be successful. We need providers, owners, and directors to join our association. So the first thing I would suggest to do is joining. I know it feels like one more fee in a world where everybody's scraping to, every last dime out of their businesses. But organizations like ours can't survive, let alone thrive, without those membership dues. That's a big part of how we fund our efforts.
Right.
And I try to come back at our conferences and through other meetings and say, this is what your dues is paying for. For a very poignant example, when the pandemic hit, there were all the advocacy groups that are the think tanks and whatnot in our state advocated that they shut down all licensed providers and only allow exempt programs like the Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCAs, who are some licensed and exempt, to provide all the childcare for essential workers. So their dues, unknowingly to them, went to me advocating and keeping their business open with the governor's office and giving them that choice. Other states were shut down. So that's what your dues membership dues go to.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is I would highly encourage you to possibly come to a meeting or a training that they have, and or join the advocacy network. We should be really, really strong because we have such large grassroots in the country, but we haven't done a good job of marshaling that. But that's part of the job of the state association, is to put out those calls to action, to monitor what's going on and tell you when to reach out with your voice, because you represent a vote and possibly a lot of votes. Get some parents or teachers and staff involved. So, and I'd say the third thing is, if you don't know your state elected officials, your state senator, your state rep, don't be afraid of them. They're people just like you. And I say, unfortunately, people don't realize. I always tell people, well, childcare is as complex as healthcare, but most people don't realize it.
Yeah.
And the experience they bring to solving policy problems affecting childcare is their own experience as a parent when they put their child in childcare at some point or chose to raise their child at home. So that's the baggage that they bring with them, the lens through which they look at policy issues, and they think they understand childcare when they really don't.
Right.
So it's our job as members to get out there as owners and directors and sit down for coffee with them and explain to them, back home in your district, invite them to come to your center and read, and let them get a flavor for what you do. Something like that. But you can't even invite them to be sort of a chaperone substitute for the day, to sort of understand a day in the life in your center.
Right.
So, those are the kind of things you can do once you get to know and build that relationship. And that's key to being successful on a policy level at the state level and or the federal level.
Mm-hmm. So I love that. And to that point, I'll just mention, so that people have several chances of hearing about our group, but we've developed a Facebook group called Childcare Champions that I actually named after something that you said, Ellen, that inspired me, because talking about people that are championing childcare across our nation. And we actually have a new resource that we're going to post in that group with every single state and the association, the Child Care Association for that state. So if you're listening to this and you live in Montana and you don't know what your association is, you can go to this resource that I will post in the group, which is the Child Care Champions Facebook group. So we want all of you guys listening to come on in and join that group. It's on Facebook. It's a private group, but anyone can join. And the more voices and members we have, the more we will be able to influence policy at the state and national level. So
Absolutely.
that's my first plug for that. And then you can go in there and then you can get the resource with all the state associations and the links. So I want to shout out to my friend Lynn Wenger at One Place Software, because she and her CEO, Martin Bing, created this list of all 50 states with all the links. And so she shared that with me. So shout out to Lynn, and I'm going to post that. Yeah. Good. Way to go. So thank you so much, Lynn. So join your state association and pay dues, be an active dues paying member, and go to a meeting or training and start networking and learning about how to impact issues at the state level. So those are the 2 calls to action, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
And you can find really good mentor centers that aren't specifically in your area that you can network with and bounce ideas off of, marketing ideas, other ideas. So there's really a lot of fellowship that comes out of it. That's a huge part of why our members participate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about advocacy. It's also just business success that you'll get resources to as well. So I love that. If somebody, I think there are a handful of states that don't either their association has kind of died on the vine, or they don't have one at all. How would somebody in that situation get started? I mean, I guess you could band together and figure out people that, maybe want to help you start a state association. But I mean, have you ever started one from scratch, Ellen?
We kind of were on the federal level, and then ECE stepped up. So we stepped back because they had a lot of resources. But I mean, you can do what we were doing, which was it takes 4 or 5 committed individuals in a room, hopefully leaders in the state. If you have, like in Georgia, we have Decal has quality rated peer ambassadors. And so we have several of those on our board. But that came along after they were on our board, but their leaders recognized that way in the community by our licensing agency as well as by their peers. And you start building that grassroots, and then you from there start building. You're going to have to ask for some contributions. And I'll tell you this one thing that's imperative to getting this started is try to make sure, I call it my Venn diagram of members. You have to look out for all the members. We have way more issues in common than we have in opposition. So you want to have, there are people that only care about licensing and exemptions and now stabilization funding, right? Because that came to every center. So that is now, for the first time, every center was involved in funding. There are people in Georgia that care about that and lottery funded pre-K. There are a lot of providers that don't have those classrooms, but there are a lot of providers that do. So that's a separate issue on funding and issues around pre-K. And then there's the food program. There's nonprofit, for-profit. There's franchisee, franchisor, corporate. So you need to make sure when you're putting a group together, try to be thoughtful and try to look at that Venn diagram of members and say, okay, do we have the nonprofit community represented? Do we have the corporate community represented? Do we have, members of, do we have the independent business owner, which can be your franchisees or not a franchisee? I recommend having both.
Right.
Because people see it from all those different lenses. And that really is part of my success, is because I welcome diversity of thought on our board so that we come to the best solution and we get the buy-in, hopefully, of all the members. You're not allowed to not care about your fellow members' success in a way on our board, in the sense of, I don't mean it to not be competitive, as a business owner, but I do mean it when we're working together as a voice on behalf of providers. Someone on my board once said, well, I don't care about that because that doesn't affect me. And I said, yes, you do, because we look out for all of our members.
That's right.
Association. So that's how I would start it, with a small group of committed people that represent those different sort of factions. And then start developing sort of a plan and start doing some fundraising, because it takes money to eventually hire someone. You're going to need a voice down at the Capitol, a voice before you're a regulator. When I started with GCCA, it was $5,000 and 5 people in a room. And I was a young lobbyist who was eager to build her business. So I was willing to go there and fight on their behalf. And then we built it to this, over 20 years. So you can find people who are eager to work with you and on your behalf, because they're making a name for themselves and building their own business.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. You mentioned ECEC. So just let's give a shout out to them, and how do they fit into the mix? And I know that they have a group that is representing mixed delivery. So you also have home-based providers. So all these different facets, we have like these niches within the niche of childcare. So just be aware of that, guys, when you're putting this together. And it's all important. It's not like centers are more important than home, or, blah, blah, blah. It's like we're all together as one. So what is ECEC for those folks that don't know?
Sure. And I should say both ECEC and NCCA. So let me get into my acronyms.
Okay.
The 2 organizations started stepping up. One is the National Childcare Association. A lot of us, like GCCA, were members once upon a time, and then they sort of lost their strength. And a lot of us chose to leave the organization several years ago. They're starting to build their advocacy efforts back up. And they, as well as the Early Care and Education Consortium, that tends to be more of your, while I would say NCCA is probably more independent childcare centers.
Yep.
The Early Care and Education Consortium, ECEC, is more of the big boys, right? It's your Primrose, it's your Goddard, it's big schools like that are funding it. And they have hired a lobbying group in DC, especially with the advent of Build Back Better, because like most things, it was well-intentioned, but when it got to practical application, would have actually shut down our industry and really hindered it with good intentions. Which happens all the time in legislation. All the time. That's why they need you to come be the expert and educate them on the policies they're proposing and the unintended consequences of things they're proposing. So just to give you one small example, but it would have absolutely crippled our industry. I was very honored to be asked by the Republican ranking member, Chairman Burr from North Carolina, Senator Burr, to testify before the Senate Health Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and it goes by HELP Committee for short, on the Build Back Better bill, and by Chairwoman Patty Murray. And that hearing occurred in March. So in March, they were still contemplating trying to pass the guts of what was in Build Back Better in the reconciliation process. We ended up getting left out, but that's where we were setting the stage for that. And so one of the things that had been proposed that they wanted to include in the reconciliation piece was that all teachers in the next 5 years in early childhood would have a bachelor's degree. To give you an example, so in preparing for that testimony, I met with our licensing agency and said, would y'all help me talk through the issues and things you see with Build Back Better that they may not have thought of? And they said, Ellen, we got there. We now do require bachelor's degrees of all of our lead teachers in our lottery-funded Georgia pre-K classrooms. That's 3,800 classrooms in Georgia. But it took us 15 years to get there. And during the pandemic, we've had to issue a waiver so that people who are working towards it also qualify, because there aren't enough people with degrees. Right. If we required that of all teachers the next 5 years, we'd run out of staff.
We're done. Yeah.
In a minute. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that they mean well, but the practical application would absolutely do the opposite of what they were trying to do. It would shut down access to childcare nationwide.
Right.
So I apologize. I've forgotten it was about ECE. I was like, I've gone too far down the rabbit hole. Where's the best practice? But yeah, so I worked with ECEC and NCCA too, got on a call with them to talk about my testimony, and they were leading the lobbying efforts at the national level, just like I lead the lobbying efforts at the state level. And, they would tell us, hey, we need you to go lobby your delegation on this. So we would go and meet with our individual members, and they would keep us abreast of all the changes and what they saw happening and where we needed to try to apply pressure. Ultimately, sadly, we weren't successful. Again, 75% of bills are defeated, only about 25% passed. So, and probably less so in Congress. I'm using the Georgia statistic. So it's way easier to be defeated than to win. So that's not a reason to get discouraged. As Margaret Thatcher said, sometimes you got to fight a battle more than once to win it. But so you got to go into lobbying with that attitude. That's those two national groups and kind of how we work with them as a state organization, because they're boots on the ground in DC. Obviously, living in Atlanta, Georgia, I can't be boots on the ground every day at the Capitol and don't have those relationships. That's what I do at the state level. So that's what they're doing at the federal level, and then communicating that information down to us so that we can then work with our delegations to try to apply pressure in favor of our policy issues.
Yeah. And so part of that too is an approach to the political landscape and climate of a nonpartisan approach, which is what our group is. And so also just, we want to educate the listeners, and if you want to speak to how you work with people on both sides of the aisle, and we're just trying to forward our issues that we feel are important for the growth and health of the childcare industry, regardless of Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, right? So people can't get caught up in all of that.
Exactly. You got to check that stuff at the door, because the very first thing I started with, and the other three witnesses who were brought by Democratic senators, all started with the same thing. Childcare is not a partisan issue. We don't want it to become a partisan issue. This is about caring for children and making sure they maximize that brain development in those first few years of life. And we don't need this to become a political football. And I remember Senator Tim Kaine commenting on, he was shocked because at partisan hearings, rarely do you hear all four witnesses saying the same thing. They're usually in opposition. And he was shocked because the four of us all had a lot of testimony in common, because that's where we come from as childcare providers. You gotta love the parent of your Republican mom as much as you love the Democratic parent mom,
That's right.
Or Libertarian or Green Party or whatever they are.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
love that.
We don't care about that. We are pro legislators who are pro childcare. That's our party. We're the childcare party, right? That's how we view it. And you can win people over. We've become so divided, and we like to yell at people from afar rather than sitting down and having those real honest conversations. But that's what moves the needle in childcare, is having those honest conversations with elected officials. So you may be a Democrat living in the heart of a Republican county and have nothing but Republican elected officials. You've got to learn to communicate with them on that level, because that's who you've got that you can influence. So just remember that we want them, and we want to, I say elected officials are just like small children. It takes repetition in order to learn concepts, and we have to teach them, because they think they know about childcare because their child was in a childcare center, and that's not the case.
No, that's definitely not the case. It's a much different path to walk as a parent versus a business owner or a childcare professional. So, and when you're learning a new industry, it takes repetition to really get it into the DNA of the learner. Is no. Like, there's a surface level of understanding of how this industry works at the nuts and bolts. And then as you get to know more about it, you start to get that clarity, so it does take time. So talk a little bit about what I learned from you, Ellen, is the real work of us making a difference at the legislative level happens at the committee level. And the committees is where it's at. So we're coming into an election season, and this podcast isn't going to actually release until right around the election, or maybe right just after. But coming out of the November election, we're now have an awareness, our group, Childcare Champions, and certainly you and your colleagues, to now we're going to discover what are going to be the new or repeat senators and Congress people in committee, like you mentioned, Patty Murray and Bill Burr, I believe, right? So then we have to just watch, like, who are the real stakeholder legislators that are at the committee level. Is just that's where the happens.
So other than getting to know, it can be overwhelming when you think about a whole Congress of 435 members, right? Or if you think about Georgia has 236 members in our legislature, because we just like having lots of legislators in Georgia. So you don't have to get to know all 236 of those. Know the two that represent you. And then the most important thing, and I think this relieves a lot of people, is you need to know the substantive committees through which your legislation is going to flow. You're going to want to know the Appropriations Committee, and they're going to have a subcommittee on education in all likelihood in most states. You're going to want to know your education committees that deal with just policy, not the budget side, but just the policy side of it. And then you're going to want to know the leadership so that you can get things moving once it's gotten out of committee. But that's the, the good news is they do kind of become mini experts. Now, some of them don't always want to learn, but they do kind of become mini experts because they sit on a committee for several years generally, and they get to choose their committees. I mean, they get to put forth their preferences. The speaker or the lieutenant governor or whoever's in charge of that in your state appoints their members in each chamber, but they get to express preferences. So the people that are on the education committees pretty much want to be there. They're concerned about issues. So they're interested in hearing from us as well. Like, they want to know the problems. They want to know the solutions. That is one thing I'll say. Don't come with a problem without a solution, because if you leave it up to them, you're not going to like the solution they come up with. But yeah, so it's not as daunting as it sounds. And I think a really important thing, to remember about this stuff is, while things look very clear and obvious to us in our own viewpoint and our lens, one legislator once said to me, Ellen, that Rorschach sort of looking thing that says, you look at it one way and it looks like the young lady, and you look at it the other way, it looks like the old lady. Well, he said, if you look at it and see the young lady, and I look at it and see the old lady, who's right? Right. Well, we both are, and we're both wrong. So that's kind of where legislation lives, in the gray. And sort of persuading people. I always say what I do is sales. It's just selling policy instead of widgets, right? Instead of selling my childcare center, I'm selling policy affecting childcare centers. Right. So that's, it's when you, and understand too, that these are all people, especially at the state level, generally most state legislatures are not professionals. Florida's different. I think Texas might be different, where they're paid to do it full time, but most of these are part-time legislators. So they have jobs that they have to go back to, families they have to go back to. They are bringing their own experience. So I always say, imagine if you, as a childcare owner and director, were asked as an elected official to make decision on banking laws and healthcare and things that you didn't have anything but your life experience. Right. That's why you play an important role in educating them. And they really do, most of the time, want to hear from you. Sometimes they get a little big for their britches and say, one legislator actually once said to us, I'm so sick and tired of my constituents telling me what they think. Which is not what you normally hear. No. But, you get some doozies, but right. But, by and large, they're there because they care, they're committed. And you would need someone to educate you about banking laws to say, and you always tell the truth with a legislator, always, always. I know that's not always the rule in politics these days, but from our perspective, we always tell the truth. Because here's the thing. If I come and lobby you, Kris, and I tell you something that's a lie, and then you go and you voted based on the information I gave you, and you turn out getting crucified for it at home because what I told you was a lie, you will never trust me again, and you will never vote or listen to anything I have to say again. Right. It's okay to say, I don't know to legislators, but I'll have Ellen get back to you, or I'll work on getting back to you with an answer. Yes. Perfectly acceptable. But they're just people that are making decisions, putting their pants on one leg at a time. And I think some people just get intimidated by the title, or, politics has some pretty negative connotations. My husband always says, please don't tell my mom I'm a lobbyist. She still thinks I'm working as a pianist in a strip club, kind of thing. There are always negative connotations around politics. But what they do affects so much of your life, so much of your business's potential for growth is wrapped up in what they do. And in childcare, particularly, it's at that local level. Yep. You can actually have a real impact at the local level. It's much easier to impact it at the state level than the federal. Yes. Childcare is one of the highest regulated industries in the world. And so we, as part of that, have a responsibility to make sure that those regulations and policies and laws are in our best interest whenever we can impact that. So this is a call to action to everybody is, and I've done sessions from stage about how to be an influencer, how to be a local influencer in your community, things that you can do, media that you've been in, interviews, writing books, writing pamphlets, being the subject matter expert. Everybody listening is the subject matter expert in childcare in their town, region, or state. And we have to bring those voices up so that, because the legislators, to your point, they want help. They want to understand the issues
that we're facing because we're their constituents, most of them. So I love that. And I think a lot of people are intimidated, or they're like, oh, I'm too busy, somebody down the street will do it. I don't have to do that, but no, because we actually all need to spend time on this.
Exactly. Because if you say you're too busy and then you get a decision that comes down from a governor that says we're shutting you down for the beginning of the pandemic and we won't reopen you for 6 months, you're going to really wish you had spoken up.
Yep.
We heard,
all right.
I got calls from other states saying, how did y'all stay open? I said, we fought for it like crazy.
Yes, we fought for it.
We talked about the parents who didn't have the option of staying at home. And
right.
What we wanted was providers to choose whether or not they wanted to stay open. We wanted you to control your business. That's what we were about. But we wanted there to be adequate care for children whose parents were single parents and didn't have that option of just working from home or staying at home. And so, you got to fight for it,
Yeah. Awesome. Final question is, what's ahead either for you or what do you see if you had a crystal ball, any predictions, forecasts for 2023, anything that is on your mind right now and where are you headed, Ellen?
On the federal level, that this would impact everybody. I think I'll speak to that. Right now, the crystal ball still says that Republicans will probably take over the House, the Senate, probably not. So I think we'll have a lot of divided government. If the Republicans were to take over both branches, then Susan Collins out of Maine has a good piece of legislation that would double funding for CCDBG over 7 years. That would be huge. And that might have some support to make it all the way through. On the flip side, if Democrats retain control, Patty Murray and Tim Kaine have really come around and modeled a bill that would be very beneficial. Like they've taken the good parts of Build Back Better. I don't know that if Republicans control the Senate, which seems pretty likely. I think 538 said 66% likely as of today. Then I don't know that anything will pass, and we may just be other than working on stuff through reconciliation. But things move slow, especially in DC. And the thing I'm most worried about is the cliff we're going to see when the stable funding runs out next September. One thing I've been telling my members, and I want to tell everybody here too, make sure all those funds have to be expended. So make sure you are taking your first expenses and applying that to stable. Take your tuition and set it aside. If you have not taken advantage of the employee retention tax credit, while a lot of seniors were not initially able to qualify, they changed it in the future legislation. Do that. It can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars to your business to help get you through that patch as well.
Yep.
And last thing I'd say is figure out now what you need to charge. And by the way, on the employee retention tax credit, if you don't know how to do it, we have we're working with a group. Please go to GCCA's webpage. It costs you, you pay them, but it costs you nothing to go on our website and go find out if you're eligible, and ERC will walk you through the process and help you file for that tax credit and be with you all the way through the audit process if they were to audit you and defend you through that. So that's a resource for you right here and now to take advantage of that. And then find out how much it costs you to pay your folks, what you need to be charging in tuition in order to pay your staff what you're paying them now, because you're going to need to gradually build up to that. So if you're not doing that math, please do that now.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And yes, we have been working with people and diving in on the financial implications of their stable grants, paperwork, and extra things that they need to do around audits, depending on the amount of money that they're getting, the ERC. We also have a company that will help you get your ERC as well. So we'll put all those resources in the show notes for y'all for this podcast. And absolutely go get that. Our company even qualifies, Ellen. I'm so happy. Childcare Success Company, because we had to completely recraft our business in 2020.
Of course.
And so we actually also qualify. So we're excited.
GCCA qualified. We'll be getting tax credit back as well. Yeah. So we're very excited.
No, it'll help you guys through, because you've got to raise wages for teachers to attract the best and the brightest. And then you have to figure out a way to fund those labor and wage increases. And that's what we've been talking about for the last 5 months. So I love that. And I want to thank you for being here today. This was a wealth of information. And one more call to action, your guys' homework is to go to the Childcare Champions Facebook group, just search it up, and request to join. You'll be pulled in and be part of our advocacy group at a national level. And I think right now there's, around 100 people in there, and we would love to have thousands of people in there, all childcare professionals, trying to do things at the state and national and local level in advocacy. So we're sharing resources. We'll share the full list of all the state associations in there, so you guys can just click on it and join. And anything else that you want to share? I don't know if you want to give any contact info, gcca.org or georgiachildcare.org.
Georgia Childcare, all spelled out, GEORGIA childcare.org. My cell phone is 404-556-1999. So if any of you have questions about starting an association, or, my email is ellen@georgiachildcare.org. So feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to brainstorm with you and talk, because I'm going to learn from what your state's doing too. Nice. So with that being said, just join. That's what I'd say, is join your state association. Yeah. That's the other piece of homework.
Love that. Love it, love it, love it. Well, thank you, Ellen Reynolds. This has been an amazing episode here at Childcare Rockstar Radio. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been so fun. I appreciate the invitation.
You're very welcome. And thanks, y'all, for tuning in and listening and continuing to be involved and be with us here on the podcast. This is Kris Murray, your host, and we will talk to y'all next time. Take care and God bless. I hope you liked this episode of Childcare Rockstar Radio. If you did, please share it with someone you know and help spread the word to your friends in our industry and on social media. Childcare business success is my passion, and I'm honored to be on this journey with you. As a thank you for listening, learn more about how to grow your business and make more income with our brand new free quiz, the What's My Number One Income Killer quiz, exclusively for preschool and childcare owners. Take the quiz today at childcarequiz.com to discover what your number one income killer is and how to solve it. Take care and God bless.